in this border. You can see that, for instance, you have only, I don't recall, is 8 border controls between Guatemala and Mexico, which is really scarce. And the same you can see it in the case of the borders in other countries. These are common situations in the borders. These are border passes, not regular border passes, but irregular border passes. This man that you can see at your right, he opens and closes the fence if you want to pass. So that's the situation at borders. In the case of this photo, you can see this, I don't know how to say it in English, the monument is the border, no? So that's the situation, and this is the different institutions that are dealing with public security. I'm going to present it for each country. In the case of El Salvador, you have a secretary under the presidents working with prevention in public security. At the same time, you have a National Council of Public Security doing prevention. You have a Ministry of Government doing prevention at the local level. And then you have the Ministry of Justice and Public Security, which should be in charge of public security, but they only have a share on that, and the Ministry of Defense, which has linkage with every one of the other institutions. So the military, for instance, in the case of El Salvador, are working at the local level with technical assistance also, and they are working with the National Prosecution Office, and they are working with the local level in the area of presidency. The same, I'm sorry, this is in Spanish, but we don't have it in English, and it's a very complex graphic. In the case of Guatemala, it's almost the same. The Ministry of Defense is here. That is the Ministry of Defense. And as you can see, there are rows linking every institution there too. In the case of Honduras, they also have a presence. You have, in the case of Honduras, a Secretary of Security, especially devoted to public security. Still, you have 6 different directions in the police, so it's very complicated to deal with the operational framework. This is if you compare the numbers of the armed forces members and the police members and the private security members, you can see which the situation is, and there is not actually a very big presence in numbers of the armed forces, not even in budget, not in personnel. The presence is especially regarding the operational capability and the organizational structure that the armed forces has in the region. In the case of the numbers of private security, this is the recognized figure, but countries are saying that they know it's 2 or 3 times that number. You can see the money devoted to public security. We are speaking about, in the case of these 3 countries, less than $1,000 million. And you can see here an example of the distribution of tax revenue regarding public security. So in the case of El Salvador, every citizen that is paying their taxes, do you know that there is a huge problem with taxes in this region because they cannot collect every tax they need. So every inhabitant which is actually paying a tax is devoting $122 each year for having a police. Look at the number in the case of Guatemala. It's $54 a year for each citizen devoted to have a police. And in the case of Honduras, it's $44 a year devoted to the national police. I wanted to present these figures because if we are speaking about the military and about militarization, we also have to see what is happening on the other side. This is the strength of the national police in El Salvador. It's a young police. It has been created 20 years ago after the peace agreements in El Salvador. It has not a very long history, and it's a new police. It was conformed with members of the former guerrilla and with members of the former army, so they had to create a new police, and it has a budget of $233 million for 2011. So they have current expenses for 87% of their income. So it's really different to have a really good situation in the police in this country. In the case of Guatemala, you can see that the numbers are almost equal. You are speaking about 20,000 people guarding the whole country, borders, and so on, and a very small budget too. It's also a young police. It only has 14 years, and it has not, for instance, internal controls. And in the case of Honduras, it's not a new police, but it's divided into 6 national different directions. So you have 3 different offices dealing with the crime scene, or 3 different offices having an investigation for narcotics, and so on. So there is a complexity that it doesn't help with the management of public security. I'm going to pass this very quickly because I don't have time. It's only an example of, you can see there the distribution of the police and the numbers, 2 police, for instance, for each, for 1,000 inhabitants, so it's a very scarce police. And so the armed forces are mainly in the borders in each country. This is the case of Guatemala, and this is the case of Honduras with the concentration of the police. The cooperation of the armed forces in public security is mainly related to border control, in some cases to prisons. They guard prisons, especially in El Salvador. And they have, in the case of Honduras, a huge prevention. I'm going to pass. This is in the case of El Salvador, the kind of activities they are dealing with. They have a regular plan of intervention of the armed forces to guard the public order. For instance, in cities, in the 3 cases, each police is being accompanied by 2 military. In the case of cities, they are not supposed to make arrest, but they are guarding the police itself. So that's the situation. And they have, in the case of Guatemala, a lot of work there in the north. That's the Petén, and there is the border with Mexico, where they are dealing especially with narcotics. And in the case of Honduras, they have the huge prevention program in Central America, which is called Guardians of the Nation. They are taking kids from, I don't recall if, I think it's from 5 years old to 21 years old, and they took the young people, and I won't say what they say. They are training them and giving them some instructions, not a military instruction, but they teach them how to work, and they try to put some values on them. El Salvador is beginning with a program of this nature, and you can see the extent of the program. So it's weird because in Honduras the main institution dealing with prevention of crime are the armed forces, and when you speak to Honduras academics or analysts, they say, okay, that's it, but they are maybe the only one that has a view on Honduras 20 years from now. So um, I should say that the precarious resources that these countries have are really scarce, and the energies are really divided into different institutions. There is a great need of having better police institutions and more resources to this, devoted to this. I could ask if we could speak on a militarization trend, and I would say that it's hard to say so. I think that there are no empty spaces in politics, and so what we can see is an empty space because the police cannot deal with that, so the military are taking the place. So the armed forces have the history and they have the organizational structure, while the police has little history or they don't have the resources. You can see that, for instance, in the case of Honduras, the police dealing with borders, narcotics, kidnappings, money laundering, I don't recall terrorism, has 800 personnel guarding the borders of Honduras and the whole country. And they don't have either cell phones to communicate with each other. So that's the situation. Can we speak on militarization when we have situations like that, and we don't have enough resources and we don't have enough energy devoted to build up a better police? I said that my final point would be the prospects for international cooperation. I think that international cooperation must focus on the police side and must focus on how to get the police doing a better job, how making better criminal investigation capabilities and better resources, technical resources, but also human resources, and how to build up internal controls, which you don't have in these countries, with the exception of El Salvador, and how to focus on the issue that is really affecting these countries, which is the possibility of having a better place to live, but also the possibility to